wanted to specialize in was daughters of immigrants. And my title is a bit long. I say that I'm a trauma-informed therapist for women of color who are daughters of immigrants. And that is very specific because I recognize that daughters of immigrants from all races, I wanted to be very specific in who I work with because I realize this is who I work with best and who I'm very passionate about helping. So, yeah, born out of a need. I didn't really see anyone who specialized in working with daughters of immigrants. It's very important. And I think that it's the framework behind everything that I do and everything that I talk about. Well, it's the same thing as why I've chosen to talk about mental health. I'm trying to destigmatize everything that I talk about, right? There's a lot of shame, like you said, around sex, just as there's a lot of shame around mental health. And to me, the two are definitely related. I think you can be both. And I have a lot of clients who are spiritual. I usually get more spiritual clients than religious clients. But I think whatever your faith is, whatever you believe in, there definitely can be that intersect, right? And we can honor both of those. And I love that more people are starting to.
Welcome to the Unfiltered Minds Podcast, the only culturally diverse podcast where we discuss ways to destigmatize mental health, as well as promote self-seeking behaviors amongst our youth and family members struggling with ADHD or depression. Now, here's your host, Jane Levy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Unfiltered Mind Podcast. This is the platform where we discuss ways to destigmatize mental health, as well as promote self-help seeking behaviors amongst our youth and their family members. We are super excited today to have our guest, Nancy. She is the founder of Global Citizen Therapy and the host of the Citizen Therapy podcast, founded in March 2020. Nancy, welcome to the Unfiltered Mind podcast. Please give us a little backstory about you and what you currently do.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to be here, excited to be talking with another daughter of immigrants about all things mental health, which is my bread and my butter. This is something that I'm very passionate about. I started this practice, like you said, back in 2020 and born out of the need, of course, in the pandemic. But yeah, once I actually started working with clients, very quickly I decided that what I wanted to specialize in was daughters of immigrants. And my title is a bit long. I say that I'm a trauma-informed therapist for women of color who are daughters of immigrants. And that is very specific because I recognize that daughters of immigrants from all races and cultural backgrounds have a lot of similarities. But I wanted to specifically work with women of color as well because I do know quite a bit about racial trauma, and I am very comfortable and confident in working with people who have struggled with incidents of racism and have that race-based stress and, are experiencing microaggressions in the workplace from family members, from partners who are of a different race, that kind of thing. So I wanted to be very specific in who I work with because I realize this is who I work with best and who I'm very passionate about helping. So yeah, born out of a need. I didn't really see anyone who specialized in working with daughters of immigrants. I saw, and I knew that therapists specialized in the migrant population, and I thought, I love that. That's great. And we do know that migrants have higher rates of depression and anxiety compared to people who have not migrated to a new country. But what the studies are also showing us is that children of immigrants have even higher rates of depression and anxiety than their migrant parents. So I definitely thought that, okay, we have very unique challenges and there's similarities across the board, whether our parents are from South Asia, they're from South America or Latin America, or they're from Africa, where there's just so many similarities, even across cultures. If you're a woman of color and you're a daughter of immigrants, and what I've seen, because I've been working with people all over from different countries, from different cultural backgrounds, and I see that, yes, we struggle with, especially, growing up in a Western country and being in a workplace that does have a lot of white people. We struggle with those microaggressions and we still struggle with that cultural identity piece. And so I definitely wanted to work with this population, help them, and in that way help myself as well, because I'm on my own healing journey. I will be, for my entire life. That's the way I see it, that there's no end date to healing. So yeah, that's why I'm here, and that's why I started the podcast. I have the podcast, and I say it's for women of color who are daughters of immigrants to feel seen, heard, and validated. And yeah, we're on the fourth season now, so yeah, I'm very, very excited. And yeah, there's definitely tons of other exciting things that I'm working on in the background, so that we can form this community that doesn't exist. Like I said, it came out of a need.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nancy. I can relate to that because I migrated here from Sierra Leone, West Africa at the age of 16. I can just imagine what I went through, the culture shock. And I had to go to high school here. Everything was new for me. I have to make new friends. So all that being that said, and my mom was a single mom. So navigating all those life stresses, I can relate to the topic we're going to talk about today. And you emphasize on soul care versus self care. How important is that for you?
It's very important. And I think that it's the framework behind everything that I do and everything that I talk about. Because one thing that I've noticed is that daughters of immigrants, we are not very good at putting ourselves first, at taking care of our own needs, of even identifying what those needs are, what it is that we want out of life, out of our relationships, romantic relationships, relationships with family members, friendships. We just have been trained by society, right? Because society trains women to always be serving other people and put our needs on the back burner, and to have our own needs ignored, right? But I think definitely as daughters of immigrants, because a lot of us have been parentified, meaning that we've had to become parents since we were young children to our own parents, to our younger siblings, sometimes even to our older siblings. And so,
Mhm.
yes, we, because of that, have been conditioned to always be taking care of everyone else except for ourselves. And so, yeah, I think that I started this workshop called Soul Care versus Self Care about a year ago. And it again came out of this need. I kept seeing that so many people don't know how to take care of themselves. And at least for me, I mean, I got a master's in social work. And I remember in grad school it being drilled into me by every professor, make sure to take care of yourself, make sure to do self-care. You're dealing with very heavy things in your internship, you're learning about very heavy topics in our classes. All of us were working full-time pretty much and doing part-time internships and full-time classes. So I'm glad that the professors were telling us self-care, self-care,
Mhm.
self-care. But what I realized, and I don't know if this was the same for my white counterparts, but what I realized for me, for myself, I said, I don't actually know what self-care is, what it looks like. It wasn't modeled for me. My immigrant parents always had to hustle. I'm sure you can relate to this, especially with the single mom. They had to work very hard, especially in the new country, to provide for us, to get ahead. And so for them, they had to work really hard to survive. But that was more important to them, to model that hard work, that strong work ethic. And they always told us, you have to work really hard, because they knew that the sad reality is that migrants do have to work, three times as hard as our white counterparts, just to get the same opportunities, just to get our foot in the door. And as people of color, there's definitely that training that we have since we're kids of, okay, but you need to make sure that you get the best grades, you need to make sure that you get that internship, that scholarship, whatever it is, always be working hard. And so yeah, we're told don't rest. That's for lazy people, that's for privileged people, that's for rich people. So those are the kinds of things that I grew up hearing, and I still hear to this day from my immigrant parents, now that I work for myself. And sometimes, if I'm texting my mom, like, oh yeah, I decided to go on a road trip with some friends, and it's a Monday or something. And they're like, oh, don't
Yeah.
you ever work? Why are you not working? You're not going to make money. And, it's just very much they're scared, right? And it makes sense because they're from a different generation. They have never worked for themselves. So all of this is scary for them, right? And they just want their children to have that stability that they worked and sacrificed so much for. So I think it's radical for sure to be able to take a step back, reflect, identify what it is that is your soul care. I call it soul care because I think self care has just lost its meaning entirely. It's become such a commercialized buzzword, that we don't actually even know what it is. If you have noticed, your friends probably have been talking about self-care in regards to, oh, I was watching Netflix all night. Well, I drink myself into a stupor, but it's self-care, right? So pretty much anything, even if it's unhealthy, we're calling it self-care because we just don't see it as doing something for ourselves. And so that's why I think it's lost its meaning, and we're saying that we're practicing self-care, but really it's not helping us. It's just putting a band-aid on the problem. It's distracting us from the actual problem. We're not getting the help that we need. We're not giving ourselves what we actually need that's going to help us feel nourished and replenished. And that's because it hasn't been modeled for us. We have no idea what we're doing. So in this workshop that I call Soul Care versus Self-Care, we start to heal our relationship with self-care. We do a bit of brain spotting, we do a bit of journaling, a bit of reflection questions, and we actually identify what is the soul care that works for us, because there's not a one size fits all approach, right? That's not what people tell us. I mean, I've had so many friends tell me, oh, well, journaling works really well for me, or meditation works really well for me. And I know this as a therapist, like I know the studies that show that yoga, for example, is really good for people. It doesn't work for me. Journaling doesn't work for me. And that's what I realized as I'm examining my own relationship with self care. I had to let go of the things that felt forced because I was just feeling really guilty because I wasn't ever getting around to doing those things, right? So, this is what we do in the workshop. And I actually am going to I haven't run this workshop since it's probably been about 9 months, but I've decided that because July is BIPOC Mental Health Month, I wanted to run this workshop again live. I have it pre-recorded on my website that people can purchase, but I wanted to run it again live, so I'm going to be running it in July. I haven't chosen a date yet, but yeah, if you follow me on socials or check out the website, it'll be on there. So yeah, for anyone who wants to join, you're welcome to, because I think we can all use a bit of that soul care, finding
It's
that.
important how self care for everyone, we're all the same, but we're all uniquely different. So for me, self care could be hiking. For me, self care could be hot yoga. For me, self care could be eating clean. But like you said, for somebody else, it could be just watching Netflix, and that could be self care for them. That's what makes them happy. And then, as daughters of immigrants, like you said, we see our parents never resting, really never taking the time to even know what they like to do. They're always on the go. Like I was raised in a single parent home where my mom worked two jobs. She was always on the go. So till this day, I saw that. So I've always known that I have to work hard for everything that I have. So it took me some time when I was going through divorce to say, you know what, I really have to sit down and see what are the things that I'm actually doing that makes me happy. And that's why I found my love for meditation, hot yoga. I find my love for hiking. I find my love for taking long walk and reading. So it could be different for everyone. And not only that, we are daughters of immigrants. We also have this expectation to fulfill all that our parents could not, plus more, and having to take care of, yeah, of things. So thank you for sharing that. There is so much shame and stigma around sex, and you have dedicated season 4 of your episode on the Global Citizen Therapy podcast to talk about sex. Why do you think that's important to talk in the family homes?
Well, it's the same thing as why I've chosen to talk about mental health. I'm trying to destigmatize everything that I talk about, right? There's a lot of shame, like you said, around sex, just as there's a lot of shame around mental health. And to me, the two are definitely related. Um, our sexual health impacts our mental health, it impacts our physical health. It's all tied together. And I think that there's a lot of therapists and a lot of health professionals in general who are ignoring that. It's been something that's been taboo for so long. And actually, the first episode just came out. Was it this week? Yeah, I'm losing track of time. It just came out on Tuesday. And I was very excited because I interviewed a sexologist and a pleasure coach, and we were talking about exactly that. She's also a medical doctor, and we're both talking about that. That when we go and we visit the doctor, we sometimes have trouble having these conversations. And it could be because we have shame around talking about these conversations. But what I've noticed is that even as I've worked past that shame and now I show up to the doctor and I ask these questions, they still have no idea how to answer them. They're not used to getting these questions. They don't have that training. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to talk about this and how we can be more healthy just in our day to day lives. But yeah, I think there's just so many things, especially in terms of daughters of immigrants, that they just weren't talked about. in our homes growing up, and they still aren't talked about. It's still so taboo. And so, yeah, we're going to be talking about all things fetishization, colorism, just all the things related to, female pleasure. Just, oh, there's so much that we can get into. So I'm very excited about this season.
Nice. I think that's wonderful because when you raise a kid in a home that is strict with strict parents, it could be because of religious reasons or just because it's not something that was even modeled to them when they were growing up. And such an environment really creates the child to go outside to talk to their friends or talk to other people outside of the home about mental health. And I feel like if we have this, if we're open minded and educate ourselves and just have open discussion with our children, I think they will be more vulnerable to talk to us about things that they have questions about. And that brings us to the next question. Growing up in a very strict home because of religious reasons or just because your parents were strict, and those children are limited on experiences that they have compared to other children. What impact are you seeing with the population you're serving that actually impacting their social skills?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that it's impacting the relationships. And I grew up in a very strict religious household, and I have definitely seen that, it definitely stunts the growth, right? There's also,
Mhm.
and I think I'll do an episode on this on the podcast about infantilization and how a lot of immigrant parents do this because their growth was stunted, right? They didn't get to be children themselves. And so they want their children to remain children for as long as possible. And so, yeah, because of that, we're definitely seeing that, yeah, sometimes they're very strict. They want to protect us from the world. They don't want us to go out and hang out with our friends. They don't want us to have sleepovers because God knows what could happen, right? Even if I couldn't even have sleepovers at my cousin's house, right? Because she said, well, there's men in that house and we don't know what those men could do. And I'm like, but they're family. And she's like, no, no, we don't know what they could do. So that type of sheltering definitely impacts the way that we see men, the way that we have relationships with men, but with other people, in the big scary outside world. And so, yeah, it definitely impacts the way that we see sex and all of these things, right? There's definitely a lot of shame and guilt when we are sheltered in this way. So there's so many different ways that your mental health can be impacted, and the way that you show up in the world as an adult can be impacted by growing up in this type of sheltered setting. That, oh, this, I think this is going to be a whole other podcast episode that I'm going to do on the Global Citizen Therapy podcast, because I love talking about this. And yeah, I definitely see this with my clients as well, that they struggle with then that resentment, right? And that anger toward their immigrant parents. They have been told, you should be grateful. We do so much for you. We have sacrificed so much for you. But really, there is a lot of anger and resentment because they kept us so sheltered, and because they didn't allow us to make our own choice. We didn't have that agency. We felt out of control, and as if everything that we needed to do had to be for them because they sacrificed so much for us. So, yeah, a lot of the conversations that I'm having with my clients in our therapy sessions, a lot of it is the shame, the guilt, which, if you're a daughter of immigrants, doesn't come as a surprise. But the one that may come as a surprise a little bit is that we talk a lot about anger and resentment as well. And I think now that I've said it out loud, if you're a daughter of immigrants and you're listening, it makes sense, right? But I think, again, there's shame around feeling angry, right? And we've been told as women, you're not supposed to be angry. You're always supposed to be happy and smiling, and you're supposed to please others, right? There's this concept called Marianismo, and it comes from Catholic upbringings, especially in Latin America. And yeah, it's essentially, the need of women to always be pleasing men, right? And to be doing everything for men. And it comes from that self-sacrificing, Virgin Mary, like, did everything, sacrifice so much for it. It's complex, but I think a lot of us have grown up with that kind of thinking of, yeah, we need to make sure that we're doing everything for everyone else. And that's why I think that self-care is at the root of healing in so many different areas of our lives, right? And so, yeah, whether it's healing from racial trauma, whether it's healing from generational trauma, from sexual trauma, I think it really starts with identifying, what type of self care do I need? What are my needs? And when we say self-care, we tend to think of it as something that's selfish because it has the word self in it. So the way that I'm
Mhm.
starting to see self-care now is that self-care can be and look in so many different ways. It can also be community care. And for so many communities of the global majority, we do grow up in an environment where it's, yeah, all about community. It's all about those relationships with family, with extended family, with neighbors, with people that, that we grew up around. And that's not something that you see very often in Western countries unless you live in a very, and even then, because I grew up in a very Hispanic neighborhood. And so I grew up being close to my family, I think in my teenage years and that kind of thing. But still, it's still kind of different because you're still living in a Western country where the values of that country are very much focused on the individual, right? So I think identifying, what kind of self care do you need? Is it community care? But what's going to help you, heal from being in that strict religious type of environment? What do you need? Do you need to become more religious, more spiritual, or move away from that? Like you said, everyone is different, everyone has different needs. It's about identifying that, right? So, yeah, there's definitely a lot more that we can go into with that topic, but I think I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing also in the Black and Brown community as well, I'm not sure if that's the same in the Hispanic community. When a child is experiencing mental health illnesses, let's say my son was diagnosed, for example, he was diagnosed with ADHD. For me, because I was open to it, I read about it, I read both podcasts, CDC on the website. So I was not in denial. I knew my son, medication worked for him, but also I need to help him with his executive function skill because that's what kids with ADHD struggle with. But you have other kids who has been diagnosed, Black and brown kids who went underdiagnosed with ADHD who are struggling now because they were never diagnosed, they were never treated. They struggle with anxiety, they struggle with depression. And these kids are in these homes telling their parents that they're depressed and they just laugh about it because they don't believe in it. Or most of the time, when these kids are saying that they're depressed, they're just praying about it. I am a spiritual person as well, but I also believe that we all deserve to seek professional help. What is your take on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think you can be both. And I have a lot of clients who are spiritual. I usually
Mhm.
get more spiritual clients than religious clients. But I think whatever your faith is, whatever you believe in, there definitely can be that intersect, right? And we can honor both of those. And I love that more people are starting to see that yes, you can definitely pray about things, but seeking professional help is taking action, taking control of your life and getting that help so that you can have a bit more flexibility in your life and start to actually grow. And I think that that is one thing that I've noticed, with Daughters of Immigrants that I love because we talk a lot about, the challenges, the struggles that we face as daughters of immigrants. But I think when we talk about the strengths, it is beautiful. And one of the strengths that we have is that we are very resilient and that we are very open to learning. We are very open to growing,
Mhm.
and just healing. And we want that for ourselves and we want that for our children, for the next generation. And I love that you've been, reading and researching about how to help your son. I think that that's something that we're definitely seeing more of. I know my clients that have children, they're always researching and they're asking me, like how can I better support my child? I'm worried about, they're presenting with these symptoms. And I love that. I love that we're really intentionally trying to make sure that we do better than what our immigrant parents had the capacity to be able to help us with. Because, like we mentioned, that if they were always working, they just couldn't. They didn't have the time to really look at, what are the symptoms that my child is presenting with? Should I reach out for help? And then they just didn't have that sort of upbringing, right? Where it was okay to take someone to a mental health professional. Like you
Mhm.
said, it's something that they maybe don't know enough about. It's something that then therefore they don't believe in. They may be a little bit closed minded because their parents were closed minded about certain things and certain topics, and they're worried about what other people will think and all these things, right? It can get pretty complex. But yeah, I think it's definitely beautiful when I see, daughters of immigrants actually taking the time to reach out for help. And of course, there's so many reasons that you may be struggling with reaching out for help. Actually, one of the most popular podcast episodes that I've done is called Why Do I Struggle to Ask for Help? And I recorded that episode because I see that so much,
Mm-hmm.
so often with my clients. I see that within myself. I think I have gotten a lot better at asking for help, but of course, it's still a journey. It's still, my immigrant parents, I saw them always hustling, always working so hard, always doing things on their own, figuring
Mm-hmm.
things out for themselves, never actually, reaching out to professionals for help. And not just for mental health, but for other things, right? There wasn't that extra money laying around for you to go
Yes.
and get professional advice or whatever, right? To figure out how to bootstrap everything. So yeah, of course, seeing that, having been in that kind of environment for so long, then we struggle to ask for help. We struggle to admit when we can use a bit of support, right? But as soon as we start to see, going to therapy as something that can benefit everyone, then we start to destigmatize it, right? Because so often in our society, we hear, oh, well, you need to go to therapy, right? And it's almost used as an insult, even if people don't mean it that way. But when we start to say, you know, you deserve therapy, I think that's a huge shift. And I love to say that, and I love to say that for myself as well. Like, I deserve therapy. I deserve healing. I deserve to enter this beautiful, gentle era where I'm actually, yeah, being mindful and present with myself, looking at what it is that I need, what it is that I want out of life, and going for it, right? And sometimes it does look like starting therapy, starting coaching, starting with a spiritual healer, but whatever it is that works for you, start somewhere, right?
What I just heard you said, instead of telling somebody they need something, tell them that they deserve something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
it's the
huge
wording.
shift. Yeah, it's
Yes,
the wording.
yes. Thank you
Hmm.
for sharing that.
Yeah,
Learn
yeah.
something new every day. So let's talk about your five finger breathing. What does that entail?
There's so many different approaches that we can use. Like I said, daughters of immigrants, we tend to have a lot of anxiety, right? And that
Yes.
comes from the trauma, right? It comes from the generational trauma that's been passed down from our immigrant parents. It comes from our own personal traumas. It presents in us as anxiety, as depression, right? The way I see it, because I am a trauma informed therapist, I have a very trauma focused lens. I see
Mm-hmm.
it as whether in therapy we dive right into the root of the problem and we go toward healing the trauma, or we work on easing the symptoms, right? In this case, the anxiety. But we definitely can do both at the same time, and depending on what the client is comfortable with. But I love teaching clients different skills on how they can ease that anxiety, right? And a lot of it is, kind of breathing techniques. And it's something that, again, our immigrant parents didn't know about this. They don't know how to model, what to do when you're having a panic attack, what to do when you're feeling very anxious. So one of the techniques is a breathing technique, and it's the five finger technique. And it's pretty simple, and you can do it. I like this one because you can do it from anywhere, wherever you are. But of course, you may feel a little bit self conscious doing this in public. But you pretty much put your hand up as so, and you use your finger from your other hand, and you start to just breathe in and out as you're tracing your finger all the way up to the fingertip, going down the back, and you're just breathing in and breathing out and breathing in again and breathing out. Breathing in,
Breathing
breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. And that's pretty much the principle to a lot of breathing exercises. The other one that I like, which you don't need to use your hand for this, but it's called the box breathing. So you picture a box and you inhale for 4, you hold for 4,
And this is for anxiety patient.
anxiety, and then you
Okay.
release for 4, and you hold for 4. So you're picturing the box, right? Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. That's one that I like even better than the five finger breathing. So I encourage my clients to experiment with a few different breathing exercises. I might show them a few different ones. I like the box breathing because again, you can do it even if you are, in a public setting. People won't really be able to tell that you're doing it. So I like that one. The other one that I like is just, the shorter inhale and the longer exhale. So starting inhale for 4, exhale for 4, inhale for 4, exhale for 5. Until that exhale, you're releasing that stress, right? So breathing is something that definitely helps a lot with anxiety. So that's something that I use with my clients to when they are feeling very activated. And the other thing that I use is brain spotting, and you can do self spotting as well, and it really just helps you lower your activation level quite a bit.
So the brain spotting is for the depressed patient, right?
Well, brain spotting is it's wonderful because you can use it not just for depression, not just for anxiety. There are, some studies that say that it can be, extra helpful for, ADHD, for anxiety, for that kind of thing. But I've used it for so many different issues. I actually have a training for therapists, coaches, healers, advocates, anyone who wants to learn brain spotting. I have an intro workshop coming up next month on July 7th, where we're actually going to be talking about brain spotting and how we can use it with racial trauma. So anyone that hasn't had the brain spotting training yet, this is an intro workshop where I'm going to be teaching you what brain spotting is, how we use it to help clients, and specifically we'll go into how we can use it even for racial trauma to help our clients who are dealing with that race-based stress. So yeah, it's something that it's training that I haven't seen before. Again, the
Okay.
things that I do, they're usually born out of a need, right? It's something that
Yes.
I haven't seen before. And of course, working with this population, I work a lot with, people that are struggling with that racial trauma. So I decided to host my own training. And so, yeah, we use this little pointer here. You can see if you're watching the video. And yeah, it's just a very gentle type of approach. We essentially find what's called the brain spot. So brain spotting actually, if you're familiar with EMDR, it comes in a way from EMDR. So it's actually a EMDR therapist who was EMDR, by the way, is eye movement desensitization. And so, yeah, it's focused on the movement of the eyes, right? Going back and forth. And we have seen videos of this. There was a famous interview with Prince Harry, I think last year, where he talked about the power of EMDR. That's EMDR. So brain spotting comes from an EMDR therapist who was using EMDR with the client who seemed to have a trauma that was stuck, and he couldn't get the client to process using EMDR. And after a few sessions, he realized that the client stopped at a particular point and just stopped there. And so instead of, having her continue to go back and forth, he said, okay, let's explore that. Let's just have you just look at that spot there. And that's actually what now is known as the brain spot. And she found the brain spot on her own. And just by staring at that particular location, was actually able to tap into this unresolved trauma from childhood. And it was something that she didn't even know had happened, something that had been pushed so far down that she didn't remember it. And this is what I love about, somatic approaches like brain spotting, is that you don't actually have to talk about these things. It's not something that you have to remember on a cognitive level. With brain spotting, it helps us access a deeper part of the brain called the subcortical region. When you and I are talking, we're using prefrontal cortex. We're processing things on a cognitive level. You're talking about it. So when I'm talking, you're thinking about how you're going to respond to me, right? So it's not that type of deep thinking. So with brain spotting, we're going deeper, right? And we're accessing that part of the body where that trauma is stored, where the anxiety is stored, where, that we felt it when we experienced racism or whatever it is, whatever the issue is. So it's about lowering that activation level. So a lot of people, triggered is a buzzword. A buzzword that probably a lot of people know, like, oh, I feel very triggered right now, right? We call it activated because triggered, yes, we can be triggered by a trauma, but sometimes it's not so much what we feel in the body. It could be a memory. It could be, all sorts of different sensations that we could be experiencing. We could be hearing, someone's voice, like, oh, I'm recalling, my mom yelling at me, like when I was a child. So we just say activation. We keep it vague on purpose so that as we're using the brain spotting and we're helping the client with the use of the pointer find the brain spot where they feel the most activated, we're being vague on purpose because we want them to just notice what it is that's coming up for them. If you look over here to the left, you may notice maybe you're recalling a lot of different memories in regards to the issue that we're brain spotting. If you look over here to the other side, maybe it is that you're just feeling, the palpitations in your chest or your heart is beating faster, whatever it is, right? But it's more on your body that you're noticing things. So it really helps. And I think I love using this with daughters of immigrants because, again, we're not used to tuning in to our own needs. We're not used to tuning in to our bodies. For those of us who have done a little bit of meditation and yoga, we may be a little bit more in tune with our bodies. I think brain spotting is powerful because it actually helps us dive into the issues as well, instead of just breathing through it and letting it all go. It's a little bit of, okay, let's come in with this frame, with this lens of, okay, you want to work on this issue, right? Something
Yes.
that's been activating you in your daily life. Let's do it, right? Let's set it up with that type of frame and let's see what comes up for you. Very natural type of approach, right? In a lot of these sessions, I'm not doing much talking because whenever I ask questions, it takes the client out of that subcortical region and back into the prefrontal cortex because they have to think about how to answer me. So it's actually the brain spotting practitioner's job to, stay quiet and ask very intentional questions such as what do you notice, or what are you noticing in your body right now, things like that don't take you out of it, right? So yeah, and same thing with the client. If the client wants to talk through it, if that feels natural and that feels good for them, then they can tell me what it is that they're noticing. Or they could stay quiet and process because sometimes there's just so much happening that it just feels more natural for them to stay quiet and see where their mind is taking them, see what they're noticing in their body. And afterwards, we do that check in, right? And see how that went for them. But yeah, I love it because it's very different from traditional talk therapy. And it's so quick and it's so effective that you don't, with EMDR, there's a lot of setup involved. I love EMDR as well. I tried EMDR myself as a client with my own therapist for a little bit. But what I noticed with EMDR is that there's a lot more setup involved. With my therapist, we usually needed to set aside 90 minutes for an EMDR session. With brain spotting, sometimes I use it in the last 5 or 10 minutes of the session, or maybe in the beginning of our session, just to help the client feel less activated, especially if I notice that they're talking very fast. I might suggest, oh, do you want to do a bit of brain spotting? Now my clients, they know, like, oh, I think I want to do a bit of brain spotting. So they'll suggest it themselves, right? So I can help with that, and we can do it very quickly and switch back to traditional talk therapy at the end of it, or whatever it is, whatever the client wants. So, but it helps quite a bit. And you notice after you do a brain spotting session, I ask clients, like, how did that, following week go? Were you as activated when your dad said this about your child or whatever the issue was that we were brain spotting? And usually the reaction is, wow, I noticed that, no, I was less activated. There was something that he said that normally would have activated me a lot more, would have triggered me. But because we did that brain spotting on it, I was actually able to feel more at peace, calmer. And that's the goal with brain spotting, right? To lower that activation level. It's not about erasing the memories or anything like that. It's just about lowering that activation level. It's not about getting rid of the stressors. The stressors in our lives will always be there, but it's about just lowering that activation level so we could just feel a bit more at peace or just a bit neutral. This is one thing that my client brought up in session this week. She's like, I've just been feeling so neutral and it's amazing. And it's something that we don't think about, but the power of, there's so much emphasis, I think, in our society of chasing that happiness, chasing that joy and all of that. But I think all of that is just fleeting. It's not possible for us to be happy all of the time. It's not natural. That's toxic positivity, right? When we try to force ourselves to be happy all the time. But actually just being neutral or being grateful or, all these underrated feelings and emotions, that's actually really powerful for us not to feel very activated. That can be very freeing. So yeah.
It sounds like very effective treatment options. But Nancy, our community have the lowest rate of healthcare insurance of any ethnic group. Now, the brain spotting EMDR, are those covered under insurance coverage?
Well, I work with clients all over, so I am not too familiar anymore with. I've lived outside of the US for 5 years now, and I got trained in brain spotting after I had left the US. So I'm actually not too familiar if brain spotting is covered with insurance. I know EMDR sometimes is, brain spotting might not be, but I really want to encourage people to start thinking, about therapy, about healing as an investment in their mental health. Because once we start to see it that way, we start to move our focus. And this is why the previous season of my podcast was about money and mental health. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think many of us don't see that correlation. We don't see therapy as an investment. And I think this is one thing that I've seen, that the less we spend on therapy and on our mental health, the less impact it actually has on us, the less it helps us. I've actually seen this quite a bit because I actually started, charging a very low rate. I struggled a lot with imposter syndrome when I first started my practice. So my rates in the beginning were very low, 60 Australian dollars an hour, which is something like 40 US dollars, very low. And what I noticed when I was charging that low, I thought that I would be full, I would get tons of clients, I would be helping so many people, and I was, happy to do that. But what I noticed is that a lot of people, they were no showing, they were canceling very late, and then they weren't doing the work in sessions. They weren't very present, and they weren't doing the homework outside of the sessions. They just weren't taking it as seriously as when now my rates are 250 per session. Now our clients are ready. They're on time.
Oh,
There's no
yes.
no shows, there's no late cancellations. They come ready with pen and paper. They're taking notes,
Yes.
they're attentive, they're present, they're thinking about the therapy session before we show up, right? And so, yeah, they know exactly what it is that they want to talk about in that session. And it's the same with me. Like now, the therapist that I'm seeing is also at 250 per session, right? And so it's the same with me. Like I show up on time, I show up ready. I have thought about what it is that I want to talk about in that session. I think about, what is the homework and have I done the homework? It's just that shift, right? And it's huge. The more that we invest, the more likely it is that we're going to get something out of it. And the more likely, once we're seeing it as an investment, we actually are more likely to get a therapist that's a better fit. Because when you go through your insurance, it's very likely that you're not going to find the therapist that's going to be a good fit for you. Especially because what I do know about insurance panels in the US, I follow quite a few therapists of color in the US who talk about this. And it's what they're saying is that it's tricky to get paneled with insurance companies, and there is a bit of that systemic racism, right? That
Yes.
it's something that's known that therapists of color struggle to get paneled with insurance companies. So you're less likely to find those therapists of color that you may resonate and work best with on these insurance panels, and especially with your particular insurance company, right? I know when I did live in the US and I did use my own insurance, I saw, one problematic therapist that I was like, okay, well, and that discouraged me from going to therapy. And so I didn't go to therapy for probably another 5 years after that. So it's about finding that therapist that is a good fit. Like I have insurance here in Australia, and I know that I could use that insurance to see and to pay less for therapy. But I know that, yeah, there's very few therapists of color, that my insurance would accept. And so instead, I didn't even try. I said, I'm going to look for my own therapist and I'm going to invest and pay out of pocket because I know that it's important to me and my healing, and I'm going to get a lot more out of it than if I just see someone through my insurance company who may not really understand, who may not be a daughter of immigrants, who may not be a woman of color. And particularly, I wanted an American therapist as well who understood what it's like to be in the US and grow up in the US. So it's just everyone has that list, right? You're looking for a therapist that checks these boxes, that can work with you with this particular issue, who maybe has this background, who speaks this language. And so I think it is, something that's very important to invest in. And when you're limited by your insurance and you kind of see it in that way of, okay, well, I have this insurance, so I have to use it, it limits you. And that's just my 2 cents on the topic. But yeah, definitely there's options, and you can always, find the therapist that you think is going to be a good fit. And even if they're outside of your insurance, you can talk to them and see if they have a sliding scale, or maybe they have a group program that you can join. I'm actually starting a group program very soon. We don't have a date yet, but I'm starting it with another therapist who also specializes in working with daughters of immigrants. So we're very excited because it's going to be something that's going to build community. It's going to be, a bit more affordable than seeing a therapist one on one. But yeah, we're going to be healing together in community. So we're very excited about that.
I would love to have her on as a guest as well. And Nancy, it's great you share that because a lot of times our daughters of immigrant, when we're looking for a therapist, we don't even know what to look for. We don't know how to vet one. What I see is we go on the website, we just see people, somebody that look like us, and then we go see them. And then you get discouraged by going back there. And then you find somebody else that look like you or the same culture, and then you go there, it's not a good fit, and people get discouraged and just stop going altogether. So that's why I wanted to bring a culturally diverse therapists like you from all over that are doing great work to amplify and elevate the work you're doing. And our platform is culturally diverse. So I have interviewed about 4 guests from Australia, and I'm sure they're all over the place. So somebody's out there who is looking for a therapist, and they will get in contact with you. That's the goal. Our goal here is really to share, have as many representation as possible, so that way people can, our viewers and our listener can resonate and just get the help that they need. It took me, when my son was diagnosed with ADHD, I didn't have the resources. I was so ashamed to talk about it because of the stigma. And the platforms that I went to, it was not a lot of people of color on there. So I can't really relate to many of those platforms. And I remembered listening to a podcast. It was a Harvard professor. He mentioned that if us immigrant, daughter of immigrants, black, white, Hispanic, can have platforms like podcasts, like what you're doing on your podcast, just have that platform where you can educate people. And I think this is wonderful. And it's great. Yeah, education is the key. I think when you know better, you do better. But again, we have to be willing and open minded to get the resources that is provided to us as well. And that actually answered my question. So, what do you think that people should be looking for when vetting a therapist? What are some of the things? Like, just name about 3 or 5 things.
I will name 3 and 5 things, and I'll also mention that I actually have an infographic on Instagram on this exact topic, and I also have a podcast episode where we talk about exactly, I think I talk for a good 30 or 45 minutes about exactly how to find that therapist that's a good fit, because it is something that you have to have a bit of patience for it, right? And you have to be willing to try and fail the first few times, because you're not going to find the right fit right away oftentimes, right? But one of the things that you can do is you can look on these directories that are for culturally diverse people, right? So there's quite a few of them in the US, such as inclusive therapists, therapy for Black girls, Latinx therapists. There's one for South Asian therapists. So I encourage you to start with those directories, especially if you are in the US. In Australia, I'm starting to see there's 2 that have popped up that are for culturally diverse people as well. So look and see if there's anything like that in your country, but look for certain keywords as well, such as culturally sensitive therapist, or therapist of color, or, and look, if you are looking for something like, certain issues such as racial trauma, Google that with therapist and see what comes up for you, right? I think a lot of people, they don't know what to search, so they just search therapist near me, and so then they'll just get all types of different therapists, right? And they might not be exactly who you're looking for. So using these directories, using certain keywords in Google, that can be really helpful. I think one of the things that I talk about in the podcast episode is the questions that you can ask during the consultation call. So being really ready, before you have that consultation call with that therapist, and asking them, you can ask them personal questions. I think it says a lot if a therapist isn't willing to answer personal questions about themselves, about their identity, about how they work. Because the way I see it, we shouldn't be a blank slate. We shouldn't expect our clients to be super vulnerable and open with us if we can't also answer those same types of questions, because it can be helpful for the client, right? For me, I asked my own therapist before I started working with her if she was religious. It was a very personal question, right? What are her beliefs? But for me, I know that I have some of that religious trauma. And I know that I haven't worked well in the past with therapists who are very religious and who try to shame me for, my sexuality or things like that, right? So for me, it's important. So identifying what it is that's important to you, what kinds of topics you're going to want to talk about during those sessions, and trying to find therapists who maybe align with those values, with those beliefs. That can be important if you're looking for someone from a certain cultural background or who speaks a certain language or who specializes in a certain population or who has a specific modality. We call them modalities, but it's the technique that we use for treatment, such as brain spotting or EMDR or CBT. Now with TikTok, I think a lot of people know a bit of those, buzzwords of the techniques that the therapists use. So if there's something that you've seen and that you're curious about, then maybe looking, okay, CBT therapist, culturally sensitive CBT therapist near me or whatever it is, right? And being open to, telehealth, I think can be really beneficial in finding that therapist that's a good fit for you. Because yes, sometimes you may be living in a city or in a country where there's not a lot of therapists that look like you or therapists that you're looking for who might be a good fit. So being open to, therapy over Zoom. I really struggled with this in the beginning when 2020 hit. I had never done therapy over Zoom as a client or as a therapist. I was like, I don't know. I don't think this is going to work. Being open to it because I
It's
think,
working. Yeah.
yeah, it's working.
Yeah.
It works really
And
well. So I think
and
being
and
open
I
to
didn't
it, trying it.
yeah, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Nancy. I remember when my son was diagnosed, I had to take him to counseling. So I went counseling and I met somebody that I knew at that counseling center. I never went back
Yeah.
because of the
Yeah.
stigma. I was ashamed. So
Yeah.
the virtual visit actually really increased the need for us, right? Daughters of
Yeah.
immigrants to really get the help that we need because some people might not even want to go to a center, right? That's a
Yeah.
huge step for them. They just want to do it online. So I remember, so when COVID hit, my son was doing virtual therapy and I said, oh, thank God, because I don't have to go there again and see one more person to know that something is wrong
Yeah.
with my son. And
Extra
that's why I
privacy.
wanted to share. Yeah, that's why I wanted to share my story. Because I asked my son, do you think we should share your story? He said, yeah, everybody has ADHD. He's 16.
Yeah.
He said, everybody has ADHD. I said, nobody, not everybody has ADHD. And that's why I wanted to bring awareness here because I know how it felt for me when he was diagnosed. I didn't have the resources. I didn't know anyone that's their daughter or their son was diagnosed. But after I start talking about it, Nancy, that's when I found out. Like two of my girlfriends told me, "Oh, my son has ADHD. My daughter has ADHD." I said, "Had I known, I probably would
Yeah.
have reached out to them for a resource." So
Yeah.
that's why I share that story on
It's
every
so
guest.
important.
Yes, yes. So people will know that. Our last topic is any words of encouragement for someone who is yet to be diagnosed with depression, anxiety, or ADHD or any form of mental illness, how important it is for early intervention in mental health. I mean, you have been doing this for quite some time. What are some words of encouragement that you can just give them real quick?
I think that one of the most important things is to actually look at what are your current thoughts about therapy? What are your current beliefs about therapy? Taking a moment and actually reflecting and analyzing on your own before you even reach out for help. What are some of the things that I believe about therapy? What are some of the things that I've been told about therapy? And how is that going to show up? And how has that been showing up for myself? Has that actually been stopping me from reaching out and getting help? Actually, yeah, taking that time with yourself. And this is something that even I started to do this just last week. I started to think about this because I'm like, you know what? There still have been certain moments, even though I've been working as a therapist for a while now, there have been some certain moments where, like, oh, money's a bit tight. And so I'm like, oh, do I need to, should I see a therapist or should I, save that money? And I'm like, wow, I still see therapy as a luxury when in reality, my mental health was suffering because, of course, money again and the lack of money impacts our mental health. We have that financial anxiety. And so then
Yes.
we're not doing so well. So I think if anything, we deserve therapy even more then in that moment than we would when things are fine, right? So actually looking at what are some of the things that you believe about therapy? Do you believe that it's a luxury, that it's only for for rich people? Do you believe that it's only for white people? Do you believe that it's, only for people who are in crisis, only for people that are having suicidal thoughts? A lot of people think that it's something that you only use when you're really, really in dark, desperate times, right? But if we start to see
Yes.
therapy as something that's preventative, as something that, yeah, anyone can go to therapy and benefit from it, right? Even if things in your life are great, right? You can still go because it's about that personal growth and development, right? And there's still so much that you can do. Just like I love when couples go to couples counseling, even when there's not any problems, but just as a preventative, just to work on their relationship. It's the same thing. You can do that as an individual in individual counseling. Go and work on yourself. And this is one thing that, my coach actually says this all the time. She's like, women of color, they love to invest. They love to grow. They love to learn. We're all lifelong learners, right? And we're just wanting to grab and to learn things, right? But unfortunately, with therapy, it's a little bit different sometimes. Sometimes it's, oh, well, we don't see it as learning and as growing. We see it as, there's still so much shame and stigma around going to therapy. So we see it as like, no, this is like going to a doctor. It's something that you only go when there's a problem, right? If we instead start to see therapy as, kind of like coaching, right? Because a lot of therapists in therapy, we do a lot of coaching, right? And we help people like, okay, so what's next for you now that the depression has eased, right? Now that you're not feeling as anxious, you have all these coping skills. Where do we go next? Like, what do you want to work on? All these things, right? So there's so many things that therapists do. So I think examining what it is that you think about therapy and trying to shift that perspective can be really helpful. And that's the tip that I think I'll leave you with.
Sometimes our friends can be biased. They're not going to be biased because they're not your friends. You can
Right.
have those fresh eye and your
That
whatever
non-judgmental
issues.
approach.
Yeah, no judgmental part. And then it's be real. They're going to tell you as it is because no feelings attached. Yeah. So that's always, I said, if you can't afford a therapist, get a coach. Therapists will focus on the emotional part, but the coach is really going to focus on the skills, like what is the task? What do you need to do? So either way, it's investment.
Either way, it's
You're going to
investment.
regret. Yeah.
And what's crazy
Yeah.
is that usually therapy is a lot cheaper than coaching. So
So where can our viewers and our listeners find you, Nancy?
So you can find me, the handle on all socials is Global Citizen Therapy. So I'm on LinkedIn, on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, on all the platforms under the same name, Global Citizen Therapy. The name of the podcast is the Global Citizen Therapy Podcast, and the website, globalcitizentherapy.com. So pretty easy to find me as long as you remember, Global Citizen Therapy. And yeah, I'm accepting clients for the month of July. So if you're interested in working with me or you're interested in any of the programs or trainings or workshops that I have coming up, I am going to have a busy July as far as workshops and trainings. So yes, but I'm very excited. I'm very excited that BIPOC Mental Health Month is coming up and excited to help as many people as possible. So if you're interested in working with me, there's going to be tons of ways that you can do that. So I encourage you to check it out, check out the podcast, follow me, and see what I'm up to.
Wonderful, wonderful. Any questions for me, Nancy, before I end this?
No, I just wanted to thank you again for having me on. And this has been a great conversation that I think is going to help a lot of people. So thank you for doing what you do. I think it's really important that we show up and we be that representation. So yes, I'm so glad that you're doing this. So glad that I found you.
Likewise. And on the Unfiltered Mind podcast, we want to amazingly thank you for your time today. It was a joy to have you. Thank you so much. And we hope our listeners and our viewers will resonate with what you've shared here today and just be able to give somebody hope and use those resources to get better. Thank you again, Nancy.
Thank you for listening to Unfiltered Minds podcast. If you love what you're learning on our podcast, we ask that you please join the Unfiltered Minds community by subscribing and sharing our podcast on YouTube, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Our dedicated team of ADHD coaches are committed to making a positive impact on the lives of our listeners. Through our thought-provoking podcast, we offer valuable resources, PBT training for ADHD, and a supportive community that understands the journey of mental health challenges. Also, you can visit our website at theunfilteredminds.com, where you can sign up to be a guest on our podcast, as well as sign up for our 8-week parent behavior training course on ADHD.